In the 1800s, many white Southern plantation owners owned slaves. These slaves were received from some kind of auction, and were often separated from their families. After being purchased as though they were property, these slaves were brought onto plantations. On the plantations, the slaves would live in small one-roomed cabins. Depending on the harshness of the slave master, slaves who were severely ill would sometimes not have to work in the fields. Usually the only reason a master would allow an ill slave to stop working was because they wanted the slaves to recuperate fast and be back to work soon. Even pregnant slaves would work all the way up until the time they gave birth, and would sometimes be back to work the next day. Slaves' meals consisted only of what they needed to stay healthy because plantation owners wanted strong, fit slaves. Their diet was made up of mainly grains and proteins, such as bacon, cornmeal, and salt herring.
Slaves were given very little time to eat, and soon the masters would yell at them to go out to the fields and begin the long day's work.
Time to work! Hurry up and get out onto the field!
After eating their measly meal, slaves called field hands would begin harsh work in the cotton fields. It was difficult to grow and pick cotton for many reasons. One reason was that there were bugs called whiteflies that would suck all the juices from the plant, killing it. Also because cotton bushes were very thorny, the slaves would rip up their hands while just trying to pick the cotton. Slave and slave masters would sometimes work side by side, but the slave masters could not stop whenever they wanted to, and did not even have to work at all, while slaves were not allowed to stop.
Get up and get back to work, slave! After sunset, the slaves would go back to their small cabins. Their cabins had dirt floors and no furniture or real beds. The only beds they had were made up of piles of straw and old rags. Their cabins had no electricity, which means no heat. Back then, slaves were very lucky if they had a fire or lamps. During the winter months, because the field slaves could not go to work on the plantations, they would do other jobs. Some jobs were tending to the livestock, sewing and dyeing cloth, and chopping wood. Slaves would only receive one set of clothes per year. That included 1 or 2 shirts, a pair of pants, and 1 pair of shoes for the men, and 1 or 2 dresses, a handkerchief to use as a head wrap, and shoes for the women. All of these items were made of fabric that was described as coarse Negro cloth.
Bringing in the sheaves, the stars are shining for us all. Hear the angels calling, the devil has no place here.
Amen.